Right as I was about to receive my diploma, my own mother stood up and screamed something that shattered my entire world. My name is Lauren Bennett, and on the day I finally graduated from the University of Texas at Austin, I thought I'd made it. I thought I'd escaped the shadows of my past. I thought I had earned peace. But just as I stepped toward the podium to receive my diploma wearing a cap and gown I'd paid for in monthly installments, the unthinkable happened. From the third row in front of hundreds of people, a voice pierced the air like a blade. She cheated her way through college. The words hit like a slap across the face. My knees almost gave out. That voice, it belonged to my mother. My mother, no, let's call her what she really was, my adoptive mother, Janice Bennett. The woman who had raised me, fed me, clothed me, and controlled every breath I ever took. And now, in the moment I had fought tooth and nail to reach, she decided to destroy it all. The entire auditorium went silent. The echoes of applause faded instantly. Phones stopped recording the celebration and swung around like spotlights toward the wreckage she was creating. I froze mid-step only a few feet from the university dean. Dr. Carroll's outstretched hand held my diploma, but all I could hear was her. "She's a fraud," Janice screamed. "I know because I paid her way until she stabbed me in the back." I could see the students behind me shifting uncomfortably. Some whispered, some stared. A few tried to act like they weren't watching the train wreck unfold, but all I saw was her face twisted, triumphant, venomous. This wasn't a sudden outburst. No, this was premeditated. Janice had chosen to ruin me on purpose, and she had picked the most public stage to do it. My eyes locked with my best friend Autumn's in the crowd. She looked horrified. Her dad, sitting beside her, slowly shook his head in disbelief. Professors I had respected, mentors who'd written me recommendation letters, now looked at me with doubt clouding their faces. And yet I didn't run. I didn't cry. I stepped forward slowly but deliberately and took the diploma from Dr. Carroll's hand. His eyes met mine with something between sympathy and curiosity. I leaned in close and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "I need to speak with you privately after the ceremony. It's about what she just said. But more than that, it's about something bigger." He gave me a slight nod and mouthed, "My office, 30 minutes. Janice wasn't finished. Security hadn't reached her yet. She stood now, commanding the room, waving her arms like she was some betrayed matriarch. She begged me for help. She stole from our family. She failed every math class until I tuned her out. Because I'd heard it all before. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the dramatics. It was her specialty. But now, everyone else was hearing it too. And in that silence, something shifted inside me. I wasn't 18 anymore. I wasn't the girl who left home with nothing but a suitcase and a student loan. I wasn't the scared kid who used to lie awake wondering if I was the broken one. I had survived, and now it was my turn to speak. If you've ever had someone try to erase your truth in front of the people who matter most, then stay with me. You need to hear the rest of this story. And if that moment ever found you facing shame not of your own making, please take a breath and hit the like button, leave a comment if this resonates, and let's walk through this together. Because I promise, it doesn't end here. It starts here. When I was 17, Janice Bennett told me I was lucky to be in her house. "You'd be nothing without me," she'd say. "You'd be in a foster home or dead in a ditch." And I believed her, at least for a while. I wasn't biologically hers. She had adopted me when I was 4 after my father died in a construction accident, and my mother, his second wife, disappeared within weeks. I never knew her name. Janice married my dad late in his life, and when he passed, she took me in like some unfinished responsibility. At least that's how she treated me. Growing up under Janice's roof meant understanding that love had conditions. Straight A's expected. No dates. No friends over. And if I ever dared question her authority, the punishment was silence. Days of it. Sometimes weeks. By senior year, I had started to fight back quietly. I applied to colleges in secret. I took on a weekend job at the local grocery store, stashing every dollar in an envelope hidden behind a loose tile in the bathroom. But the tipping point came when I got accepted into the University of Texas on partial scholarship for psychology. She lost it. "I told you, Lauren," she shouted, "you're not studying that garbage." Psychology. What? So you can sit around and diagnose feelings? You'll go for accounting. Period. That night I packed everything I owned into 2 garbage bags. She didn't stop me. She didn't even open the door when I left. I stayed with Autumn's family for 2 weeks before moving into campus housing. I worked 2 jobs, stocking shelves and tutoring algebra. I studied in 24-hour libraries, slept in borrowed coats during winter, and ate from vending machines more times than I care to admit. Still, I kept going. Every class I passed, every paper I submitted, I did it alone. I thought the worst was behind me. Until sophomore year, when I went to check on my financial aid refund and was told my education fund had been depleted. I laughed at first, thinking it was a glitch. There must be some mistake, I told the clerk. But the look on her face turned my blood cold. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett," she said. "The account is empty. In fact, you have a negative balance." The room spun. The fund my father had left in a trust, the one Janice had always claimed to be managing responsibly, was gone. 58,000. Gone. The university's finance office couldn't explain it. All they could show me were withdrawal logs. Starting late in my freshman year, huge sums had been transferred to multiple unknown accounts. Signatures bore my name, but they weren't mine. That night I sat on the floor of my apartment, diploma dreams fading fast, and realized she was still controlling my life, even from miles away. She hadn't just cut me off emotionally. She had robbed me legally, financially, maybe even criminally. And that's when it hit me. If I didn't fight back, she'd win, again. I didn't know where to begin. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't know anyone in law enforcement. But I had something she didn't: the truth. So I did what survivors do. I started asking questions. And one of those questions led me to an unexpected source, a junior attorney named Eva Morales, who volunteered at a local legal aid clinic. "You might want to speak with a financial investigator," Eva said after hearing my story. "This sounds like more than just a family issue. This sounds like fraud." Fraud? I remember the word hit me like thunder. Until then, I'd thought of everything Janice did as cruel, yes, but forgivable. Human. But fraud, that meant laws were broken. That meant consequences. That meant maybe for the first time she wouldn't be able to twist this into another tale of how ungrateful I was. Have you ever uncovered a betrayal so deep it rewrote your entire past? If that moment has ever found you, don't keep it in the dark. Tell your story below. Someone else needs to hear it. And if this story is resonating, stay with me. This isn't just about stolen money. It's about something far more dangerous: stolen identity. And I was ready to take it back. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from a former FBI financial crimes investigator in a strip mall office next to a tire shop. But that's where my search for the truth led me. His name was Frank Talbot. Late 50s, graying at the temples, voice like sandpaper. He wore old boots and a tie that looked like it hadn't seen an iron in a decade, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He listened silently as I explained what had happened. I handed over my stack of documents: scholarship records, withdrawal notices, even my old bank statements. He didn't speak for a while, just nodded occasionally, flipping through the papers with thick, practiced fingers. When he finally looked up, he asked one question: "Do you want to make her pay or make her stop?" I hesitated. "I want to make sure she never does this to anyone else," I said. He nodded once, then leaned back and said, "Let's get to work." The next 3 weeks were brutal. Frank filed subpoenas for account histories, traced electronic transfers, and began reconstructing the financial trail Janice had left behind. What we discovered still makes me sick. She had accessed my education fund by forging my authorization. Over a dozen withdrawal forms bore my signature, but Frank's handwriting expert said it wasn't mine. There were hesitations, ink pressure changes, strokes that didn't match my writing profile at all. She had used my social security number to open joint accounts in my name. She had called my bank pretending to be me, Frank, even found recordings of the calls from customer service logs. Her voice fake, sweet, and full of concern, saying things like, "I'm just trying to move funds to cover tuition. My daughter's under a lot of stress." It was grotesque, efficient, cold. The money had been funneled into an offshore account under a shell company based in the British Virgin Islands. Frank tracked the transfers through 3 intermediary accounts. It was laundering pure and simple. And the worst part, the purchases. Designer handbags, spa retreats, luxury cruises. Tens of thousands spent on indulgence while I scraped together enough to buy secondhand textbooks. There was a week she'd gone to a wellness retreat in Sedona. That same week, I pulled 3 overnight shifts at the campus library just to afford groceries. I felt violated, like my life had been stolen, not just my money. Frank sat across from me at the diner one night, mid-investigation, his coffee untouched. "Lauren," he said slowly, "this isn't just about your college fund. This is identity theft. It's wire fraud. It's forgery. These are federal crimes." My stomach clenched. "I always thought she was just cruel," I said. "I never thought she was criminal." Frank didn't blink. Cruel and criminal often share the same address. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed records of the fake signatures, the accounts in her name, the statement from the bank that proved she intercepted my mail. She covered her tracks well, he said, but not well enough. I stared at that folder. For a long time, I couldn't even touch it. Because opening it would mean accepting that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war. She'd rather destroy my future than let me have it without her. I remember whispering more to myself than to him, she's been planning this since I left. Frank's expression didn't change. Then you plan your move better. You only get one shot. He wasn't wrong. This wasn't just about pressing charges or filing a lawsuit. This was about reclaiming everything she tried to take: my credibility, my independence, my name. So I started building my case, slowly, quietly. I collected every document, every recording, every email. I kept a journal with daily entries. I logged her phone calls. I recorded every word. Because I knew something she didn't. I wasn't her scared little girl anymore. And when the time came to confront her, I wouldn't be alone. Have you ever been forced to become your own lawyer, your own shield, your own last line of defense? If you've been there, if you've had to prepare for war without backup, share your story in the comments. Because the next part of this, it's when I decided to stop surviving and start fighting back. The day I filed the lawsuit was a Thursday. It was raining in Austin, that slow, steady drizzle that feels more like a whisper than a storm. I walked into the offices of Chen and Morales, holding a flash drive in one hand and a folder stuffed with printed evidence in the other. My fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Margaret Chen was the senior partner at the firm, a woman in her early 50s with silver streaks through her jet black hair and a voice that could slice through steel. She reviewed my case for 2 hours without speaking much, only asking for clarifications here and there. When she finally looked up, her verdict was clear. Your mother committed federal crimes. Those words hit different when spoken by someone who understood the weight behind them. She forged your signature, impersonated you with banks, intercepted financial documents, and laundered funds to an offshore account, she continued. That's identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery at a minimum. My mouth felt dry. So, what happens next? She leaned forward. First, we file a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. Once that's in motion, we'll compile the criminal evidence and refer it to the district attorney. And how soon? Immediately, she said, standing. We're serving her today. That afternoon at 3:22 p.m., a man in a dark blazer knocked on Janice's front door with a manila envelope in hand. Frank had followed the process server at a distance just to be sure. Janice opened the door, took the envelope, read the first few lines, and slammed it shut. Moments later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. The next day, she called 5 times before switching tactics. I received a text that read, "What have you done after everything I gave you?" Then a voicemail. "You ungrateful little, how dare you embarrass me like this? You want to destroy our family. Fine. But don't come crawling back when the world sees what a fraud you are." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded everything to Margaret. 2 days later, we received her formal legal response. Janice had hired a high-powered defense attorney from Dallas, someone known for representing corporate fraud cases. "She's serious," Margaret muttered as she scanned the brief. "She's going to fight." "Good," I said. But as determined as I felt, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Exactly 1 week later, I received an invitation in the mail from the university, an official notice for the commencement ceremony. I had nearly forgotten about it in the chaos of building the case. At first, I wasn't sure I wanted to go. The ceremony felt symbolic, yes, but also vulnerable, public, exposed. But then I thought, why should I hide? I earned this degree. With blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. With ramen noodles and triple shifts. Without her. And so I said yes. I picked out my gown, my cords, my shoes. I planned to invite Autumn and her family. I even started writing my valedictorian speech because, yes, I had earned that too. And that's when it happened. The scene you already know. Janice stood up during the ceremony and screamed across the auditorium. She cheated her way through college. Every hair on my arm stood up. She hadn't just chosen that moment to humiliate me by chance. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was laying the foundation of her legal defense in front of 500 witnesses, trying to discredit me before I could speak. It was sick, strategic, and unmistakably Janice. But here's the thing about manipulators. They never expect their targets to evolve. They expect the same scared version of you they used to control. And that's where they fail, because I was no longer her scared little shadow. I was a woman armed with truth facts and a fire no humiliation could extinguish. Has someone ever tried to discredit you just when you were about to rise? If you've been torn down in your moment of triumph, share your truth. It matters, because the next step, that's when I turned the whole thing around. And I wasn't doing it just for me anymore. 30 minutes after the ceremony, I walked into Dr. Carroll's office with my cap in one hand and a folder in the other. My name was still being whispered in corners of the auditorium, but I had no time for embarrassment. I had work to do. Dr. Carroll, the university dean, was already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He gestured to the leather chair across from him with a gravity that made the moment feel heavier than any class I'd ever taken. "I know that couldn't have been easy," he said softly, "but you handled it with more dignity than most adults twice your age." I nodded, unable to find the words. Then I slid the folder across his desk. "Inside is everything you need to understand what happened, and why I need the university to support me as a witness." He opened it and began to read. Inside were printed copies of the forged financial aid documents, bank records, matching signature comparisons, even transcripts from the phone calls where Janice had impersonated me. Frank's investigator report was neatly tabbed and annotated. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Dr. Carroll didn't speak. When he finally looked up, his expression was a blend of anger and concern. "Miss Bennett, this is serious." "I know," I said. "No, I mean, this is federal serious. If even half of this is provable, and it looks like it is, your adoptive mother could face real prison time." I nodded again. "That's the goal." He leaned back and rubbed his forehead. "What do you need from me?" "Just your presence," I replied. "At the hearing. Your statement that you saw her behavior, that you witnessed what she said, that it wasn't provoked." "You'll have it," he said without hesitation. I don't know what I expected, maybe some institutional hesitation or a warning about reputation, but I got none of that. Only quiet, firm support. It felt like the first brick in the wall I was finally allowed to build around myself on my terms. But that day wasn't over. That night, Frank called. "She's moving money again," he said. We traced another transfer from her shell account in the Virgin Islands to a lawyer's retainer account in Dallas. "She's using my money to fund her defense?" I asked. "Looks like it." My jaw clenched. "Can we prove it?" "We already have." With that evidence, Margaret moved quickly. She filed a motion to freeze Janice's assets until the case was resolved. The judge approved it 2 days later. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Janice, for the first time in years, couldn't move a dollar without it being tracked. But what happened next showed me that even cornered animals still know how to bite. At 7:41 p.m. that evening, I got a voicemail. Her voice was cold, controlled, and somehow even more terrifying because of it. "Lauren, I hope you're happy. I hope all this attention makes you feel powerful. Just remember you're still my daughter. And no matter how far you run, blood doesn't forget." I saved the message. I sent it to Margaret. And then I sat in the dark, staring at my ceiling, letting the quiet wrap around me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. If you've ever been threatened by someone who once claimed to love you, if their voice still echoes in your memory, holding shame over your head like a noose, please know you are not alone, and you are not powerless. And if this story is making you breathe a little deeper, go ahead and like it, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone out there might need to know they're not the only one, because the courtroom was next, and this time she'd have to speak her lies under oath. The day of the preliminary hearing dawned cold and bright, with the kind of stillness that feels more like a warning than a gift. I wore my best suit, thrifted, tailored, and paid for, with 4 tutoring sessions, and arrived at the Travis County Courthouse an hour early. Margaret met me on the steps, briefcase in hand, calm as ever. She had a gift for turning chaos into order, and I clung to her presence like a lifeline. Inside the courtroom, I spotted Janice immediately. She was seated on the other side of the aisle, dressed in navy and pearls, her hair carefully curled. Beside her sat Richard Blackwell, the high-profile defense attorney from Dallas. The very one she'd paid using the money she stole from me. She didn't look at me, not once. I wish I could say I felt nothing, that I was untouchable by then. But the truth is, seeing her triggered everything I'd buried for years. The control, the gaslighting, the twisting of reality until I doubted my own memory. But then I felt Margaret's hand gently squeeze my shoulder, and I remembered I wasn't that girl anymore. When Judge Amelia Rhodes entered the courtroom, the energy shifted. She was sharp, no-nonsense, with gray hair pulled into a bun and eyes that missed nothing. "This is the matter of Bennett versus Bennett," she announced, adjusting her glasses. "Preliminary hearing on charges related to alleged financial fraud." Margaret stood with practiced ease and laid out our case-forged documents, stolen identity wire transfers, and intent to deceive. She presented Frank's report, the bank records, and the expert handwriting analysis. She even referenced the voicemail Janice left me after the asset freeze. I watched the judge's eyes narrow with each piece of evidence. When it was Blackwell's turn to speak, he stood slowly, deliberately, like a stage actor preparing for his big monologue. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than a bitter family squabble," he began. "My client was simply managing her daughter's educational finances, something the plaintiff clearly mishandled. This is not fraud, it's parenting." The room was silent. Judge Rhodes raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Blackwell, did your client have legal authority to transfer funds from the plaintiff's trust account into her own?" Blackwell hesitated. Janice spoke up. "I was protecting her from herself. She was reckless with money." "That's not what I asked," the judge said, voice steely. "Did you have legal authorization to access those funds after she turned 18? Janice's face turned pink. Her mouth opened, then closed. I thought I did." "Then you didn't," Judge Rhodes replied curtly. She leaned forward. "I'm ordering a forensic audit of all financial accounts involved. We'll reconvene in 30 days with a complete report. Until then, the asset freeze remains in place." Janice flinched. As we exited the courtroom, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. My legs were shaking, but I kept my back straight. In the hallway, my phone buzzed 17 missed calls, all from family. One voicemail stood out. It was from Aunt Caroline Janice's estranged younger sister. "Lauren, we need to talk. There's something you don't know. Something about the inheritance your grandmother left, and what your mother did with it." I stared at the screen, stunned. The hearing had opened a door I hadn't even known existed. I had been fighting for what Janice stole from me in the present. But maybe, just maybe, she'd been stealing from the past too. Have you ever felt the truth was deeper than the lie you were already fighting? If you've stood on the edge of one battle only to find another waiting beneath it, share that moment below. And if you're still with me, thank you. Your support means more than you know, because what I found out next changed everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. I called Aunt Caroline the same afternoon, pacing my apartment like the floor might crack beneath me. Her voice on the other end was raw, like someone who had held on to something sharp for too long. "Lauren," she said softly, "I should have told you years ago. But your mother, she threatened me. And I was ashamed." I stopped pacing. "She did what?" "When your grandmother died," Caroline continued, "she left money in a trust. $50,000 for your education. Another $50,000 for your cousin Jamie. I was named as backup trustee. Janice convinced me it was best to let her manage both. Said she had a better financial strategy." I closed my eyes. My heart sank before rage kicked in. "She told me the money was gone," I whispered. "That it was all used for taxes and housing when I turned 18. Caroline exhaled shakily. "It wasn't. I found out years later she moved it into her own investment accounts, but I didn't have proof she was so good at covering her tracks. I confronted her once. She told me if I opened my mouth, I'd never see another family holiday again." And just like that, everything clicked. Janice hadn't just stolen from me. She had been stealing for decades from the people closest to her, all while painting herself as the noble matriarch who sacrificed everything. I hung up and called Margaret immediately. "This isn't just about my education fund anymore," I said. "She stole inheritance money meant for me, possibly more than what we've documented." Margaret's voice sharpened. "Then we expand the discovery. We request all financial records from the last 20 years. By Monday morning, a subpoena had been filed. Meanwhile, my younger cousin Jamie texted me after Caroline spoke with him. Turns out Janice had told Jamie his share of the inheritance had been invested in a trust for him that didn't perform well. He'd never seen a dime. The fallout spread like a ripple in a still pond. My cousin Rachel reached out, recalling how Janice borrowed $5,000 from her parents years ago during a medical emergency that never existed. Uncle Jared remembered strange calls about bailing Lauren out of credit card debt, except I'd never owned a credit card back then. And then came the message that punched the air out of my lungs. A neighbor from my grandmother's old neighborhood reached out via Facebook. She remembered the week after Grandma died. She saw Janice carry out boxes of financial documents and told everyone she was handling the estate. But when asked by a neighbor why she was removing the will, she said something about keeping it safe from Caroline's meddling. My stomach twisted. She hadn't just stolen my present. She had rewritten my past. That night, I dug out a worn cardboard box I'd kept under my bed. Inside were old family photos, some handwritten letters, and one small jewelry box I hadn't opened in years. It had belonged to my grandmother. Tucked beneath the velvet lining, folded neatly, and sealed in an envelope that had yellowed with time, was a letter addressed to me. In my grandmother's handwriting, with shaking hands, I opened it. My dearest Lauren, it read. If you're reading this, it means Janice never gave you the inheritance I left for your education. I'm so sorry. I tried to trust her. I hope someday you'll use your strength to help other girls like you girls who deserve a future. Tears blurred the ink. She knew. Even then she knew who Janice truly was. I held that letter all night. It didn't erase the pain, but it planted something else resolve. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for every girl whose dreams were stolen behind closed doors and smiling lies. If you've ever uncovered a lie so old it rewrote the person you thought you were, tell us. You're not alone. Your truth matters. And if this story is stirring something inside you, take a second to like it, leave a comment, or just say, I'm here. Because this is no longer just a story about loss. It's about reclaiming legacy, and I was just getting started. With the expanded subpoena in place and the forensic audit underway, I thought the worst of the storm had passed. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at my desk grading papers from the substitute teaching job I had taken to stay afloat during the legal battle when my phone buzzed. It was my younger half-brother Dylan. We hadn't spoken much in the last few years. Janice had always favored him, grooming him into the image of the perfect son, compliant, quiet, blindly loyal. I didn't blame him for not seeing her clearly. I once didn't either. But his voice on the phone wasn't steady, it was shaking. Lauren, he said, I need to talk to you in person. He came over that evening, still in his mechanic's uniform, oil stains on his sleeves, looking like someone who'd just been told their world wasn't real. I found something, he said, sitting at my kitchen table. And I need you to tell me it's not what I think it is. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket, an old bank statement addressed to him postmarked 4 years ago. The account was in his name, and yet he'd never opened it. I read it carefully. More transactions, withdrawals, transfers into one of Janice's shell companies. She used my social security number, he said, his voice breaking. She told me I wasn't eligible for the college fund Grandma left. Said I missed the deadline to apply. I looked up slowly. She said the same thing to me, I whispered. We sat there stunned. The silence between us felt like a funeral. I turned down the University of Colorado, Dylan said, eyes glassy. I stayed here and took the job at the shop because she said we couldn't afford college. That we had to be realistic. He laughed bitterly. She told me you blew your money on clothes and parties. I clenched my fists. I was working overnight shifts at the campus library and eating microwaved beans for dinner. We both went quiet again. Then Dylan looked at me, really looked. She fooled me, Lauren, for years. She made me think you were reckless, selfish, ungrateful. He swallowed hard. But I see it now. I see what she did. Not just to you, to all of us. That night, he gave me access to everything. He had old letters, emails, tax documents. The next day, Margaret and Frank added his name to the case. The ripple grew. People we hadn't expected began coming forward, distant relatives, former friends, even Janice's old book club partner, who claimed Janice had once borrowed $7,000 to help Lauren settle a lawsuit that never existed. Each story painted the same picture: Janice, the generous mother on the outside, and the predator beneath. She had used all of us, lied to us, played us like pieces on a board she believed only she understood. And then came the phone call that confirmed everything. It was Mrs. Elaine Morris, my late grandmother's next-door neighbor. She had seen the news about the lawsuit in the local paper and tracked me down. Her voice was frail, but her memory was sharp. Dear, I remember your mother coming to your grandmother's house the day after the funeral, she said. She loaded boxes into her car, papers, files, envelopes. I asked what she was doing. She said it was just boring estate paperwork. But I remember your grandmother showing me her will. She told me how proud she was of you, and how she wanted to make sure your education was secured. I nearly dropped the phone. Do you remember anything specific, I asked? Yes. $50,000 for you, $50,000 for Dylan, and $20,000 set aside for your future wedding if you chose to marry. She didn't want you to start life with debt. My hands shook as I scribbled notes, every word burning like proof. Janice hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen blessings, intentions. She had turned generational love into personal profit. And for the first time I realized something bone deep: this wasn't about greed. It was about control. She didn't just want money. She wanted to own our futures. Has someone ever twisted love into a leash, made you believe that dependency was care? If this resonates, if your family story has its own shadows, leave a comment below, even if it's just one word. Same. Because the more I pulled back the curtain, the more I saw that this wasn't just about me. It was about every life she stepped on to climb higher. And now, every one of those lives was rising to stand with me. The days following those revelations moved fast, too fast for my heart to catch up. Margaret filed a supplemental motion to expand the damages claim in our lawsuit. The judge approved it without hesitation, citing the emerging pattern of financial abuse spanning multiple family members and inheritance structures. But the pressure wasn't just mounting legally, it was tightening around Janice's carefully curated public image. For decades, Janice Bennett had played the role of the benevolent Southern woman, the one who ran charity bake sales, donated gift baskets to hospital galas, and chaired the annual community garden fundraiser. She wore cardigans with pearls and gave speeches about grit and gratitude. But now the whispers were turning into headlines. Local newspapers started picking up the story. A few columnists who had always found her a bit much began speaking out. One even published a piece titled, "The Legacy We Don't Talk About When Family Harm Wears a Smile." And with every new detail released, Janice's mask cracked further. Her bridge club disbanded. The hospital board quietly asked her to step down. The grocery store clerks who once greeted her with flattery now offered blank stares or avoided eye contact. Even Dylan stopped answering her calls. "She keeps asking me to convince you to drop the lawsuit," he told me during one of our now weekly dinners. "She says you're destroying the family for money you don't even need." I stared at him for a long moment. "What did you tell her?" He sighed. "The truth. That she destroyed the family when she decided to steal from her own children." Then 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, it all came crashing down. I was home brushing dried paint off my jeans after finishing a landscape piece. Something I'd taken up again quietly for peace, when I heard shouting from outside my apartment. I peeked through the curtain. Janice was on the sidewalk. Her hair was unkempt. Her coat hung awkwardly off one shoulder. She was pacing barefoot, her voice echoing across the complex. "Lauren, I know you're in there. You need to stop this nonsense right now." Neighbors began stepping out onto their porches. A woman across the courtyard picked up her phone. I could see Mrs. Peterson next door mouthing, "Should I call the police?" But I didn't move. I just stood by the window and watched her unravel. "You're destroying everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed. For what? For headlines? For a payday?" She marched up my steps and began pounding on the door. "Open this door, Lauren. We're family. You don't do this to your own mother." The irony scorched. She had torn my life apart with a fountain pen and a lie. And now she wanted me to pretend it never happened. But then something shifted. Her fists slowed. Her shoulders sank. And right there on my front porch, Janice collapsed onto the steps and began to sob. Not quiet sobs. Gut-wrenching, heaving wails. The kind that make your chest tighten whether you want to care or not. I didn't go to her. I couldn't, because I knew this wasn't grief for what she had done. It was grief for being caught. She wasn't mourning her daughter. She was mourning her control. And as she rocked back and forth, whispering incoherent strings of guilt and rage and desperation, I felt the final thread between us snap. I had waited my whole life for her to say she was sorry. But now, watching her break down in full view of the neighbors she once tried to impress, I realized, even if she said it, it wouldn't matter. Because trust once shattered doesn't come with apologies. It comes with accountability. And the time for that was nearly here. Have you ever watched someone fall apart under the weight of their own deception? If you've stood silently while someone begged for forgiveness, they never earned share your story. And if this chapter of mine hits close to home, stay with me. Because the final hearing was coming, and justice was closer than ever. The final hearing was scheduled for a crisp October morning. The courthouse steps were slick with fallen leaves, and I could see my breath rising in the early Texas air as Margaret and I climbed the marble stairs together. Inside my coat pocket was the letter my grandmother had written me, the one I now carried like armor. "This is about justice, not revenge," Margaret reminded me gently as we passed through the security checkpoint. "Let the truth speak louder than the pain." The courtroom was packed. I recognized faces, some from childhood, some from high school, some I'd only seen in old family photo albums. Even Mrs. Morris, my grandmother's elderly neighbor, had insisted on attending despite needing help walking up the stairs. Janice sat across the aisle, flanked by her lawyer, Richard Blackwell. But she was different now, smaller. Her perfect hair was dull and flat, her face drawn. The expensive navy dresses had been replaced by something modest. She didn't meet my eyes. Judge Rhodes entered the room at precisely 9:00 a.m. Her presence cut through the noise like a knife. "We are here today to deliver the final ruling in the case of Bennett versus Bennett," she began. "All parties have submitted their evidence, and the court has completed its review." She turned toward the witness stand where Dr. Hammond, the forensic handwriting expert, sat with a thick folder balanced in her lap. "Dr. Hammond," the judge said, "you may present your findings." Dr. Hammond stood poised and confident. "I analyzed over 40 documents, including bank withdrawal forms, trust access logs, and scholarship authorizations," she said. "In every instance where Ms. Lauren Bennett's signature appears, I found consistent evidence of forgery." She held up an enlarged comparison. "These hesitation marks here, the unnatural flow, the inconsistent baseline. These are all indicators that someone was copying, not signing naturally." In addition, we recovered practice sheets from the defendant's home, where she had repeatedly written Ms. Bennett's name. This demonstrates clear intent to deceive. Judge Rhodes studied the sheets carefully, then looked over her glasses at Janice. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice like ice, "do you deny forging your daughter's signature?" Janice didn't answer. She stared at the table. "Do you deny transferring funds from her education trust into accounts in your own name?" Still silence. Then Blackwell spoke up. "Your Honor, my client will be invoking her Fifth Amendment right regarding any actions currently under criminal investigation." Judge Rhodes nodded once. "Understood." She turned to the courtroom. "The evidence in this case is overwhelming. The defendant systematically defrauded her daughter first by misappropriating her education fund, then by concealing inherited assets left by the plaintiff's grandmother." She paused for a beat. "In addition, the court finds that Mrs. Bennett engaged in deliberate identity theft, falsified legal documents, and used stolen funds for personal gain while her daughter lived in financial hardship." My hands clenched around the letter in my pocket. "This court orders the defendant to repay a total of $133,400 in stolen assets, plus an equal amount in punitive damages, plus accrued interest and legal fees." The gavel came down. Total judgment $300,000. Across the aisle, Janice gasped, then doubled over in her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound echoed in the courtroom like a confession she didn't have the strength to make. Judge Rhodes wasn't finished. "I am also referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution," she said. "The scope and nature of this fraud rise well beyond civil dispute." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I had imagined this moment for years, but when it came, I didn't feel triumph. I felt free. Later, as I walked toward the courthouse exit, reporters waited near the doors calling my name. "Lauren, how do you feel? Will you press criminal charges? What will happen to your mother?" But I just kept walking. Because this wasn't about headlines. It was about something sacred, the right to protect the life I'd fought so hard to build. If you've ever stood in court or in your own heart and declared that enough was enough, if you fought for your name, your future, your peace, share that fight below. And if this chapter gave you strength, tap the like button, leave a comment, or pass it on to someone who needs to know they're not alone. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a girl walking out of a courtroom with her name finally her own. Hoy ChatGPT. I thought the gavel would be the end, but it was only the beginning. The court ruling changed everything, not just for me, but for the entire town that had once believed Janice Bennett was untouchable. The next week, the local paper ran a front-page article titled, "The Mask Beneath the Pearls, Janice Bennett's Fall from Grace." It chronicled everything: my lawsuit, the inheritance theft, even the voicemail she left me. Neighbors whispered when she walked into the post office. The church she once helped fund asked her to take a leave of absence. Her name, once spoken with admiration, had turned bitter in people's mouths. But I didn't celebrate. Instead, I took a weekend off and drove 3 hours west to a quiet lake I remembered from childhood. That cabin, Grandma's cabin, had been hers since 1971. Nestled among cypress trees and humming with summer crickets, it felt like sacred ground. I unlocked the creaky front door and stepped into the dust and silence. There were photos still on the walls, Grandma in her garden, me in overalls holding up a fish half my size. A hand-stitched sign above the fireplace read, "This home holds peace. Leave your storms at the door." I dropped my bag and just stood there breathing it in. It was the first time in years I felt still. I spent the weekend cleaning, not just the dust and cobwebs, but the emotional residue of betrayal. I cleaned to reclaim. Every sweep of the broom felt like sweeping her lies out of my bones. And when Sunday came, I sat on the porch swing with a cup of coffee and read Grandma's letter again. If you're reading this, it means you found your voice. I hope it was loud. I hope it echoed. That line stayed with me. When I returned to Dallas, I launched something new. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. With Margaret's help, I established the Bennett Trust Project, a nonprofit offering legal aid and financial advocacy to young people defrauded by their guardians. We started small: a website, a hotline, a free PDF explaining how to identify forged financial documents. But within weeks, emails poured in. From Georgia, from Ohio, from Alaska. People who had their college funds stolen. People whose grandparents' wills had been revised mysteriously. People who thought they were crazy until they heard my story. One message read, "I thought I was the only one. Your story made me believe I'm not broken. I've been betrayed. Thank you." I cried for a long time that night, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood the power of truth, not shouted in anger, but whispered in solidarity. My story was no longer just mine. It was a torch passed down from my grandmother to light the way for others. And as I closed that message, I smiled. Because justice hadn't just changed my life. It had opened a door. Have you ever taken your pain and turned it into power? If this chapter resonated, or if you've ever dared to rewrite your ending, leave a comment, share your truth, and let's keep building this together. And if you're still with me, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and maybe pass this along to someone still searching for their voice. Because sometimes justice is more than a verdict. It's a ripple. And you, yes, you might be the next wave. A few months later, I found myself standing behind a podium at a university panel on financial abuse and legal literacy. The event was hosted by a law school that had invited me not just as a speaker, but as a case study. My story, once whispered in courtrooms and avoided in family dinners, was now a conversation starter for future attorneys. I looked out at the audience: students, professors, victims, advocates, rows of eyes filled with curiosity, empathy, and quiet rage. "My name is Lauren Bennett," I began, "and my mother stole my future." A hush fell. I didn't tell the story for pity anymore. I told it as proof. Proof that even when the betrayal comes from the person who raised you, you still have a right to fight back. You still have a right to heal. I spoke about the forged documents, the erased inheritance, the courtroom, the porch breakdown, the silence that followed. But I also spoke about Grandma's letter, about the cabin, about rebuilding slowly like a survivor assembling broken china, not to hide the cracks, but to show the beauty in the scars. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. She couldn't have been older than 21. "What would you say?" she asked, her voice trembling, to someone who's still scared to come forward. I looked her straight in the eye. "I'd say silence is where abusers thrive. But your voice, even a whisper, can start an avalanche." After the session, she waited by the hallway doors. She hugged me. She cried. Then she whispered, "I'm going to tell my story too." That moment stayed with me longer than the applause. 'Cause stories, true raw stories, don't just inform, they liberate. In the following weeks, the Bennett Trust Project gained momentum. We partnered with pro bono attorneys. We held webinars. A podcast producer reached out. A filmmaker wanted rights. I said no to the movie, but I said yes to the podcast, because voices should echo, not be edited. One night while editing an episode, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Dylan. I hadn't heard from him in months. Inside the envelope was a photo. Me and him as kids sitting on the front lawn with Grandma, all grins and grass stains. On the back he'd written, "You were always the strong one. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Thank you for making things right, for both of us." No explanation, no phone number, just that. And yet, it was enough. Because sometimes closure doesn't come as a conversation. It comes as a quiet nod from the past, saying, "You did good. Keep going." Have you ever received a sign, big or small, that told you healing was possible? If this chapter lit something in you, leave a comment. And if you haven't yet subscribed, I'd be honored to have you join me on this journey. Because truth isn't just the end of the story. It's the beginning of everything real. Months turned into a year, and life, real, ordinary, beautiful life, finally began to feel like it belonged to me. I moved into a new apartment just outside Austin 1 with big windows, a small herb garden, and a sunbeam that always found the couch by 4 p.m. I hung Grandma's photo near the entryway. She watched over me, smiling gently every time I walked through the door. The nonprofit had grown faster than I could have imagined. We had a small staff now, a volunteer legal team, and were featured in a national article titled, When Family Fails, the Quiet Epidemic of Inheritance Fraud. I remember reading it on my porch with a cup of coffee. There it was in black and white. My story, but now it had become something more, a movement. And yet healing wasn't linear. There were nights I still woke up from dreams where Janice stood over me pointing, yelling, accusing. You ungrateful brat, everything I did was for you. But now in those dreams I no longer froze. I stood up, I said, no, Mom, it was for you. Because that's what I'd come to understand. Janice hadn't stolen from me out of need. She stole because she couldn't bear to see me become more than her. She saw my independence as betrayal, my voice as rebellion. And I had forgiven her, but I hadn't forgotten. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to remember so I'd never let it happen again. One evening I visited the cabin again. It had become my sanctuary, my reset button. I brought a journal, sat by the fire, and wrote down everything I'd learned, not just about law or betrayal, but about myself. I wrote, forgiveness doesn't mean access. Silence isn't peace. Blood is not a contract. And sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do. I cried as I wrote, not out of sadness, but out of release. The next morning I hiked to the hill behind the cabin. The sky was wide and golden, and as I stood at the edge, looking down at the trees that cradled the lake, I whispered aloud, I'm not her shadow, I'm not her victim, I am me. And the wind carried it far. Have you ever stood at the edge of something and realized you're finally free? If this part of the journey speaks to you, leave a comment and share the moment you knew you were healing. And if you're walking your own quiet road to peace, don't do it alone. Subscribe, stay with me, and let's keep moving forward together. Because healing doesn't mean going back, it means rising. The final transformation wasn't just about rebuilding my life, it was about redefining what success meant to me. I returned to painting something I'd abandoned years ago under Janice's criticism. My small apartment's spare bedroom became my studio, filled with canvases and the rich smell of oil paint. I painted landscapes that whispered peace, rolling hills, blooming fields, and quiet lakes. Art became my therapy, a way to express emotions too deep for words. Each brushstroke healed a wound. Each finished piece was a small victory. And then there was Lucky, a golden retriever mix I adopted from the local shelter on a rainy Saturday. She followed me everywhere with unwavering loyalty, her tail wagging like a metronome to the beat of my new life. She was my reminder, even after the darkest storms, life still offers moments of joy. My morning started with coffee and walks through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors who now saw me not as Janice's daughter, but as Lauren, the woman who had taken back her story. My days were filled with work at the nonprofit, helping other young women whose lives had been shadowed by family betrayal. Their stories mirrored mine in heartbreaking ways, but together we built a community of survivors. And on quiet evenings, I would sit by the window, watching the sunset bathe the city in amber light, feeling a peace I hadn't known was possible. I realized that true freedom wasn't just about winning a court case. It was about reclaiming my spirit, setting boundaries, and choosing who I allowed into my life. It was about love that didn't demand sacrifice of self. If you're fighting your own battles, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by the people who tried to break you. It's defined by the courage it takes to keep going. Has someone ever taught you what true strength means? If this chapter inspired you, please share your story in the comments. And if you believe in the power of resilience, join our community by subscribing, because every step forward is a triumph, and your journey, like mine, is worth telling. Hoy ChatGPT. Years have passed since the courtroom drama unfolded, but the lessons I learned remain as vivid as ever. I'm Lauren Bennett, no longer a victim of betrayal, but an architect of my own destiny. The scars my adoptive mother left behind are real, but they don't define me. Through the Bennett Trust Project, I've seen countless young women find their footing, rewrite their stories, and break free from toxic cycles. The strength I found wasn't born in isolation. It was built in community and courage, and in the unwavering belief that no one should have to sacrifice their dreams for someone else's control. Janice reached out a few times after the verdict letters, full of half apologies and veiled blame. I didn't respond. Closure, I realized, wasn't about forgiving her. It was about freeing myself. In the quiet moments, I remind myself that freedom means more than winning. It means living with integrity and grace. And so I keep painting, keep fighting, keep loving those who choose love, and keep telling my story not just for me, but for anyone who's ever felt powerless. If you've been inspired by my journey, if you believe in choosing freedom over fear, please like this video and share your own story below. Subscribe and stay with me. We're building something bigger together. Because every ending is a new beginning, and your voice, it's waiting to be heard. Life is a journey of reclamation. It's the slow, steady process of taking back what was lost, whether it's trust, hope, or self-worth. For me, that journey started on a day meant to celebrate achievement, but instead revealed betrayal. Yet it didn't end there. I learned that the greatest victories are not always loud or public. Sometimes they are quiet moments of choosing peace over pain, forgiveness over bitterness, and growth over resentment. The wounds left behind may never fully disappear, but they can become the soil from which resilience blooms. My grandmother's words echoed in my heart throughout this journey that strength isn't about never falling, but about rising every time you do. To everyone watching who's faced hardship, family betrayal, or loss, I want you to know you are not alone. Your story matters, your healing matters, and your freedom matters. Thank you for joining me on this path. If my story touched you, consider subscribing and sharing this video. Together, we can create a community where no one's pain is silenced and everyone's voice is valued. Remember, healing is not a destination, but a continuous journey. And every step you take toward it is a step toward reclaiming your life.